Well, hello everybody. This is Jeffrey Cranford back with you again for the second part in our little series on kind of the rules. So I'm back with my dear friend Matt MacConnell. And Matt, let's talk a little bit about the rules. I know how difficult it is, especially being a club professional and you're having your members and you've got now you've got a tournament. So you've got to apply the rules, without preference and equally to all, and how difficult that is, especially when you get to some of the tedium that are involved in the rules. Tell me a little bit about that. That's difficult, isn't it?
100%, Jeff. One of the interesting things we always try to do with any event we have is you almost try to think ahead and think outside the box of any circumstance or any rules infraction that could take place at your course.
Exactly.
So you come up with a local rule sheet as well as what's already there.
Well, just help us understand that. For those who don't understand, the local rule sheet would do what?
It'd be kind of an addendum to the USGA rules where it might allow for something like sprinkler heads within 2 club lengths of the green.
Gotcha.
Are you going to get relief from those sprinkler heads? If you have other obstructions on the golf course, whether it's bridges or special drop areas, ground under repair, you add those to your local rule sheet so you're prepared in the instance where somebody has a ruling that you're able to do it equitable for all.
You're front running these issues that you know are going to occur, especially with the people that really don't know the rules anyway.
100%.
And you don't want to have to go out and say, well, now, Mr. Smith, I know you've come all the way from Canada for this one member guest, and now you're disqualified.
Yeah. And what makes it easy for me is when you're out in front of it and you have 2 members that might have a disagreement or somebody's asking you about a rule. When it's all there, the rule's written, plain as it is, in front of you, all you have to be able to do is pull out your sheet and say, this, sir, is the rule.
And yet, even that's challenging.
It can be, especially when you put in relationships into that mix.
Sure. That's the hard part, is that you have you're trying to maintain this relational integrity with somebody, but then at the same time, apply the rules to them.
100%. Yeah. When you have relationships that are involved, you have egos that are involved.
We don't have egos in the golf business.
No, nobody has egos, of course. Everything that gets thrown into it, at the end of the day, my job is to make sure it's equitable for everybody playing, regardless of my relationship with them.
So now we turn and we think for the spiritual application. God, obviously, if you ask the average guy on the street, tell us about God. Well, God is just the mean tyrant in the sky who has a bunch of rules and regulations, and if you don't follow them, you go to hell, and if you do follow them, you get into some paradise situation down the road. So is that really the picture of our God? Or is God not a God of rules, not a God of boundaries? Of course God's a God of boundaries, but as we talked about last week, the ultimate purpose of Jesus and the grace that came was to release us from the boundaries of the law. Well, really, the boundaries? No. Release us from the law being the primary governing effect and move us to a place of being Spirit-led. Wouldn't it be great if everybody in the context of a golf tournament was all motivated by the same Spirit and was protecting the field as much as they could? But most people are trying to get away from things. We'll talk about that in future segments here. Is that how can you use the rules to your advantage, or some of those things. So one of the things that's vital, I think, from a spiritual application standpoint, is how are we led by Spirit? How are we led by the Spirit? Secondly, God, and this is important, God submitted himself to rules. This was really strange. Through prophecy, he'd already told us in advance exactly what he had constrained himself to accomplish in the future. I'm going to send my son. He's going to die a terrible death. It's for the atonement of the world. Now, Jesus was there in the garden and could have searched out for the addendum to the rules, right? And a local rule and say, well, I think I want to try to back out of this. But he didn't. He said, nevertheless, not my will, but thy will be done. And he submitted to the rules that the Father had imposed on himself, which in a very strange way allowed us to be free. And so the rules are a funny thing. The rules are an odd thing. There's the spirit of it, but then sometimes you get some arbitrary rule and you're going, that is not the spirit of the game. I didn't mean to do that. That doesn't have any effect on my score, shouldn't have any effect on the field. And yet a guy gets disqualified. So this is complicated, and I think the USGA is working towards making these more simple, understandable, and really move more towards the spirit of the game. We'll get to that in future weeks. Thanks, Matt. I look forward to you next week.
Absolutely.